Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar presentation by CCIQ. It's called Flexible Working Arrangements and Your Business. My name is Karen Miller from CCIQ, and I'll be your facilitator today for the webinar. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you our guest speaker, Sarah Winwood. Sarah is one of our dedicated HR advisors from CCIQ's Employer Assistance team. So before we start, we just have a few tips to help you get the most out of today's presentation. There will be approximately 45 minutes of on-air time, and following the main presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. So in the text box, please do send us your questions for Sarah, and at any stage, please let us know if you have any concerns. Following the end of today's presentation, we will certainly be emailing all participants a copy of the presentation, and these will go out to you tomorrow, so please check it in your inbox for those. Once again, thank you for joining us, and I'll now hand you over to Sarah Winwood.
Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So as Karen explained, today's topic is on flexible work arrangements. And so what the webinar will include is essentially what flexible working arrangements are, who can request them, the process involved with flexible working arrangements and the approval or refusal process, the benefits to having a flexible working workplace, dispute resolution, and of course the dreaded contraventions under the Fair Work Act. As Karen mentioned as well, if we could all save our questions for the end, but please feel free to send them through to her in the meantime. So we'll get started with the first slide, which is what are flexible working arrangements. So flexible working arrangements can mean changes to work hours on any given day, changes to work patterns, so that can be the days an employee is required to work, or even changes to their work location. Of course, the national employment standards still remain, and provisions within awards such as minimum shift requirements and consultation periods still apply. However, the relevant award should stipulate which conditions can be varied and how to act these changes. If you're wanting to know which part of the Act to reference, the Fair Work Act and Section 65 goes over flexible working arrangements and outlines the specifics when employees are requesting them and who can request, just if you need something to reference as a piece of legislation. So who can request flexible working arrangements? Employees who have worked with the same employer for at least 12 months can request flexible working arrangements if they are the parent or have responsibility for the care of a child who is school-aged or younger, if they're a carer under the Carer Recognition Act, if they have a disability and are qualified for a disability support pension under the Social Security Act, if they're 55 or older, if they are experiencing family or domestic violence, or if they provide care or support to a member of their household or immediate family member who requires care and support because of family or domestic violence. Casual employees can also make a request if they've been working for the same employer on a regular and systematic basis for at least 12 months, and if there's a reasonable expectation of continuing work with the employer on a regular and systematic basis. It's also important to remember an employee who is returning to work after taking parental leave can also request a change to their work arrangement and to help them meet their responsibility to care for their child who is school-aged or younger. For example, they may request to change their patterns of work to take longer breaks, adjust their start and finish times, or possibly even work part-time. Another aspect employers need to be cautious of is unreasonably refusing a request for flexible working arrangements to accommodate parental responsibilities, as this can be treated as constructive dismissal, which is when an employee resigns because their employer says or does something that the employee can reasonably treat as dismissal, but the employer does not actually state that the employee has been dismissed. Okay, so we'll get into the application process now. I guess a general overview of the application process is the employee obviously needs to put forward that request to their employer. The employer needs to consider if the request is, something that can be accommodated or considered within the workplace. And if not, then essentially a negotiation starts between the employer and the employee. And once the agreement is reached, it needs to be in writing and signed by all parties. You can also require an employee to give a certain period of notice of a request before the proposed effective date for the flexible working arrangements. You can't, however, refuse to recognise the request made under the Fair Work Act because it does not meet your notice period requirement. In order to help employees understand the employer's process in relation to flexible work arrangements and to guide managers in making fair and consistent decisions, it is recommended that employers create a workplace policy that covers flexible work arrangements and sets out the decision-making process for requests, as well as updating equal employment policies and training programs to include this information, and also consider incorporating this information into performance reviews and appraisal frameworks. Sorry, I just got a bit of a tickly throat here. All right, so a bit further into the application process, as I mentioned before, under Section 65 of the Fair Work Act, this sets out the employee's formal requirements for the request to be in writing to the employer and set out details of the change sought and reasons for the change. From the employer's perspective, the person responsible for approving a request for a flexible work arrangement should have authority to consider changes in the business as a whole. So I guess meaning that they shouldn't be a line manager. They need someone that can have more of an overall perspective of the business and its operations. You must give the employee a written response as soon as practical and no later than 21 days after the request has been made. If the request is refused, your response must detail why it was refused. If an employee has the right under the Fair Work Act to request a flexible work arrangement, it is unlawful to refuse this request unless you have reasonable business grounds for doing so. We can help you out through that application process and responding to requests for flexible working arrangements by the means, through template letters, either approving or refusing the request. And even if a request for flexible working arrangements are denied, they should always be recorded that the request was in fact made. All right. Of course, unless the arrangement is made as a permanent variation to the employment contract, and it would be recorded there rather than as a request for flexibility. Now, before flat out refusing a request for flexible working arrangements, it's always a good idea to go through a trial period. If you're unsure of how a flexible work arrangement will suit your business or the employee. A trial period should entitle the parties to end or modify the arrangement after a certain period. So, for example, 3, 6 months or even weeks, depending on the circumstances in the business and whatever's suitable. This will give you both you and the employee time to fine-tune aspects of the arrangement and determine whether it's realistic and feasible. During the trial period of a flexible work arrangement, schedule regular meetings with your employee to assess how the arrangement is going. Open communication is extremely important. To ensure the complete success of the arrangement, you'll need to assess it from the points of view of the business, the employee, other employees, and also customers and clients as well, if that's relevant to the position and the business. If there are genuine business grounds for the business not being able to accommodate the request and a trial period was unsuccessful, remember that it's okay to refuse the request. When responding to an employee about refusing a request, your response should include the following points to demonstrate a lawfully refused request and avoid a possible anti-discrimination claim or a claim to the Fair Work Ombudsman. So these points need to be taken into consideration: the excessive cost of accommodating a request for flexible working arrangements, a lack of capacity to recognise other employees' work arrangements to accommodate the request, the impracticality of any arrangement that would need to be put in place to accommodate the request, including the need to recruit replacement employees, a significant loss of efficiency or productivity, and a significant impact on customer service. You are not expected to restructure your business operations to accommodate a request for flexible work arrangements. So even if you're inclined to reject a request from an employee, it's definitely worthwhile having a conversation with them and discussing the reasons for it. You might end up agreeing on an approach that would accommodate both parties. Okay, so how to determine whether a workplace adjustment is reasonable when considering flexible work arrangements. So there's a couple of things you just might want to jot down. How will the employee benefit if the adjustment is made? Will there be a detriment to the employee if no adjustment is made? For example, how easily will the employee be able to find alternative employment? For an older employee, it might be harder for them to find a new job than a younger employee. What cost is it to you in both monetary terms and in terms of the impact on business operations? And what is your capacity to bear those costs? Are there alternative options available to deal with the issue? How long are accommodating measures likely to be necessary? You are not required to provide reasonable adjustments on a permanent basis. However, you need to make it clear to the employee that a reasonable adjustment is temporary. Will the adjustment impact on the health and safety of others? For example, it would not be reasonable to accommodate a truck driver with deteriorating eyesight. Okay. So I guess you're probably all thinking now this is a whole lot of extra work, but I guess I thought it'd just be worthwhile putting in some benefits that flexible working arrangements can have on your business and why you should be a flexible employer. So I guess there's the clear one that comes to mind is that you could be more of an employer of choice and get better candidates when recruiting. Being a flexible employer also involves creating a balance between building your business and supporting your employees. Flexible work practices help to take pressure off your employees by allowing them to fulfill their family or carer obligations and responsibilities, fulfill their study requirements, save on travel costs and commuting times, and enjoy a better work-life balance. Flexible work practices can take pressure off your employees. For your business, this can mean a more productive and enjoyable work environment, happier and healthier employees who are less prone to stress, reduced absenteeism, lateness and staff turnover, increased employee motivation and commitment, increased levels of customer satisfaction, an increased ability for you to meet business demands, thereby helping your business deal with varying workload levels, reduce risk of your employees burning out physically and mentally, improved workplace health and safety records, a wider pool of candidates, and an increased likelihood that employees will return from parental leave, and savings on recruitment and retraining. All right, so this can come up, I guess, a fair bit when employees don't get what they want. So it's important to know the correct process to go through when a dispute does come up to resolve that flexible working arrangement issue. Okay. So generally what you will find is the applicable award will cover the dispute resolution process. So if you're covered by an award, you'll need to follow that process, as well as your policies and procedures that you might have in place within your business. And also if you're covered by an EBA, that should cover the the resolution process for disputes as well. And it's really important that you do follow these processes set out in an award or enterprise agreement, because if you don't, you can be exposed to a fine of up to $54,000 and even at least $10,000. So it is really important to follow those. And if you're ever unsure, please give us a call, because we like to keep our members out of those problems. While those fines can be unlikely, it is more likely that a Fair Work inspector will impose an infringement notice that requires you to pay a fine, and they can be in the hundreds of dollars rather than in the thousands. Okay, so these are some of the contraventions under the Fair Work Act, and outline some of the penalties and legal exposures. So it goes into the employee's right to request a flexible work arrangement. So under the general protections provisions, you cannot take an adverse action against an employee for requesting a flexible work arrangement. And as I was saying before, there's some of the penalties outlined below. So of course, as I was saying, you can refuse a request, but maybe it's, instead of refusing, it's a negotiation process to come to an agreement that both parties are happy with. And of course, if refusing, just having an open conversation with the employee as to why you can't accommodate that request, and perhaps you can review that request in 6 or 12 months' time, or when it might suit the business a bit better. It also goes into the employer's obligation to respond to a request in writing and set out the reasons for refusal, and the employer's right to refuse a request on reasonable business grounds. So I won't bother reading all of them because you can see it on the screen there. So I'm just trying to go to the next slide, but it looks like my computer might be frozen, but that's okay, because that's we're at the end of the presentation anyway. And I was just going to, the next slide has our contact details in there to contact the employer assistance team if you need more specialised advice about flexible working arrangements or individual flexibility agreements. I don't go into individual flexibility agreements today because I think that's a whole nother topic on its own. And it is more specific to the business and not as easy to give a general overview of. But I guess our number here is for the employer assistance line is 1300 731 988, and our email advice, which the whole team can access, is advice@ccIQ.com.au. And that's about all we have today for the slides. Is there any questions that have come through?
Yes, hi everyone. We've had a question through relating to slide number 3, Sarah. The question is that one of our members has said, I have full-time staff that are interested in working from home occasionally. I run a digital design and development business, so essentially, they just need a computer and an internet connection to carry out their work. Do they count as slide 3 doesn't cover them? Can you help us out with that one, Sarah?
Yes, of course. So if they're not listed on that slide 3 for who can request flexible working arrangements, it's really up to you and the business whether or not you accept or want to approve them working from home. I guess that would maybe be more a case of, a work from home policy, or whether or not that meets your business needs, and I guess a separate issue to consider and doesn't really relate to flexible working arrangements unless they are listed under those, if they're a parent, a carer, have a disability, over 55 and so on. If that is something you would like further and I guess more accurate advice on, and I can step through the situations that you've got going on in your business, give me a call afterwards and I'll chat through that one with you.
And Sarah, do you just want to go through that, the phone number that links everybody through to Employer Assistance Line so that they can reach you?
Yes, that's 1300 731 988, and the email address is advice@cciq.com.au.
Great. The next question is, if an employee is aged above 55 and needs to diminish working hours to 4 days instead of 5 days, does it mean that this request can be lawfully declined by the employer?
Okay, so just to repeat, an employee over the age of 55 who wants to reduce their work hours. So I guess, to 4 days instead of 5 days a week. What I would be looking at in this case is whether or not it's a permanent change or a temporary change. If it's a permanent change, that's likely to be permanent. That would also be an amendment to that employee's employment contract, and obviously their accrual rates for annual leave, sick leave, and those kind of things would be adjusted as well. If it's just maybe a temporary thing, then of course, if it doesn't suit the business, then you can definitely refuse that request, but you would need to provide the employee with sound business reasons as to why you can't accommodate it. And of course, if it would mean that you had to hire another employee to work that one extra day, then you wouldn't need to accommodate that employee's request. I hope that covers that question.
Thank you, Sarah. We have another question come through, and this question is, what are the risks to the business when trying to resolve a flexible work request with an employee who is not covered by award, salaried at a high level? Okay, everyone. I just wanted to make sure that there weren't any other questions through. I suppose the best way, if you do have any concerns or questions that specifically relate to your employees within your organisations, then remember, if you do need that assistance, we have a dedicated team of HR advisors, including Sarah Winwood, and all members can call our employee assistance team, where you will find our HR advisors on the other end of the phone line. The number is 1300 731 988. I'll just repeat that again just in case anyone missed it. It's 1300 731 988. We'd just like to thank everybody today for joining us for our webinar. And on behalf of CCIQ, I'd certainly like to thank Sarah Winwood, our HR advisor from CCIQ's Employer Assistance Team, for taking the time to walk us through some of those questions today, and also the presentation. I'd like to thank everyone again. We do hope that you found today's presentation informative. And don't forget, we do have a range of other webinars and events available to all members. All you need to do is visit cciq.com.au/events for further details. Now that's pretty much it from us. We do hope that you have an enjoyable afternoon ahead. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll be in touch again soon.